rugged eastern shore of Kootenay Lake's spectacular West Arm is home to one of the most intriguing forestry operations in Canada. Harrop-Procter Community Forest, born out of concern for the local environment, stands today as a unique example of what can be achieved when a critical mass of determined local folks come together.
The community had always been really concerned about industrial logging. They weren't anti-logging per se, but there had been a watershed organization here since the 70s, the late 70s, concerned about clear cuts in the watershed, concerned about safety on the narrow roads, the capacity of the ferry to handle logging trucks, timing with school buses. There was a whole list of concerns. That grew into the Alaska Creek West Arm Wilderness protest to try and keep industrial logging out of Nelson's watershed and the Harrop-Alaska Creek watershed. And so it turned into a park request to the government.
It was kind of born out of a parks campaign. I worked on that campaign. It was in the 90s. There was a strategy going on in BC that was allocating a bunch more parkland, and we had included the piece of land from Nelson to Creston basically as a park proposal, and we were successful in achieving that, except for the Harrop-Procter watersheds were excluded.
So now it's not a park, and we're not likely to get a park after 5 years of wanting one. So what is the next step?
So at that point, there was an NDP government. They were kind of toying with the idea of community forest pilot program. A bunch of us started meeting around kitchen tables and thinking, well, this won't become a park. That window is closed, but the second best option is to manage it ourselves with the values that are important to us. So it took several years. We put a proposal together, submitted it, and it was successful.
So when Harrop-Procter started, the survey work that was done at that time showed that about 50% of the community wanted an alternative forestry approach on this land base, an ecosystem-based approach. 25% wanted a park or something equivalent to a park, and 25% were more or less satisfied with business as usual type forestry. So we started with sort of 50% sort of in the middle as a third way kind of approach between a park and standard industrial forestry. And I sort of think of our mandate now is to be growing that support level from a theoretical 50% at the beginning before we even started to 80, 90%. Now that been in business for 15 years. And our community surveys that we've been doing as we go have indicated that the level of community support does continue to grow as we demonstrate what we can do on the ground.
When forestry occurs in a community's backyard, and forestry operations are controlled by that community, the values that govern its activities are different than those that drive large-scale industrial forestry. Harrop-Procter Community Forest's value proposition is a case in point.
The logic of our ecosystem-based management approach is you keep the land intact, the ecosystem healthy and functioning, and from that you can take your resource in smaller quantities, but perpetually. That's the hope. That's the belief.
Ecosystem-based planning looks at the entire landscape, and it decides what to keep before what to take, which is the reverse of how forestry is normally done. You end up collecting a lot of sub-studies in order to feed into an ecosystem-based plan, and then the management plan for where you can harvest and do human-centered activities comes out of all those net downs. It really looks at the ecosystem and says, what will you allow me to take and still keep functioning?
Harrop-Procter's ecosystem-based approach may make sense, but it's far from typical, as Eric Leslie and Rami Rothkop explain.
I would say Harrop-Procter's not an average or typical community forest operation because of our very high priority on water management and our very high percentage of sensitive areas.
What we're achieving is bigger than how small this thing is. So we achieved a form of tenure here that was based on a set of values that was really important to the community, is really important to the community, things like water protection, local control, sacred places that people use, things like that. And we kind of took that set of values and pasted it onto the land base and managing that way. So putting things like clean water ahead of timber value, and that kind of, when you live in a place, those values become really critical.
We started with our land base of about 11,000 hectares, and we said which areas are too sensitive to be doing commercial logging operations in. And there's quite a series of those areas in our land base. Some of them are sort of the standard approaches as far as steep slopes and inoperable areas, but then there are additional areas that the community forest added on top of those. For example, we have all the caribou habitat in the upper elevations reserved because caribou is an endangered species in the area. We also have all of the low elevation old growth forests, of which there are very few protected. That's an additional measure of ours. We have all of the areas that are economically inoperable removed, and then we took a more cautious approach to operability because a lot of areas in the Kootenays are mapped as operable, but when you really get down to it, it's not ecologically, economically, socially really worth going in there or realistic that you ever would. So little sub-drainages that are really steep and difficult to get roads into and that kind of thing. Then we also have riparian reserves on all of our main creeks and all of the smaller creeks as well. There are legally required reserves on the major creeks. The small creeks don't necessarily require any legal protection, but we put reserves on all of them as well. These are all the permanent and non-permanent creeks that are capable of carrying sediment. And since if you're able to carry sediment and all areas are domestic and community watersheds, we don't want to be having water sediment getting into the water. So we started with about 11,000 hectares, and by the time we've layered all of those net downs, all of those reserves into the process, we end up with about 30 or 35% of our land base that is potentially available for forest management. The main focus of the forest management in the community forest is water protection, because everybody drinks out of the creeks.
You can't drink trees, you know. You need we need clean water in our world, in our cultures, and typically in forestry and in the way we use land, water is not valued as highly as the value of wood, and that's backward. You know, it should be. You need healthy ecosystems, sustain economies and cultures and so on. Generally in BC, it's about maximizing profit and minimizing cost. In my opinion, there's cost to that, not only environmentally, but you know, we're obsessed with this throughput thing where wood just keeps going through the system, and you know, what about the environmental costs of harvesting too much, and you know, where are the jobs going, those kinds of things. So kind of rejigging the values to emphasize, you know, jobs per cubic meter and environmental protection.
As industrial-scale forestry becomes increasingly mechanized and concentrated, jobs become harder to come by. Community forest operations like Harrop-Procter are relatively small scale, but they create a much higher percentage of jobs per 1,000 cubic meters of cut.
The jobs have grown over the years and pretty much fulfilled what our business plan predicted in the beginning, which is pretty interesting for a group of people that are just supposing. You sit down and in a very calculated way try to suppose what the jobs might be.
So I'm the forest manager. I live nearby. All of our loggers and road builders are from the local area, many of them from Harrop-Procter itself. So the road builder who built this spur road in here last month, Dozenbergers live just like 2 miles that way.
And Gord Hale, who's running the excavator right there and is logging the block, lives 1 mile that way. So we have a lot of local contractors who work for us, who live in the Harrop-Procter area and in the broader West Kootenay area. We don't plant a lot of trees because we do a lot of high retention logging and we get a lot of natural regeneration. But when we do plant trees, we have a local tree planting contractor from the Nelson-Weimer area who currently does our planting. And if we do any brushing, that would also be the case. Our trucker lives, who we just saw there, is just hauling. He lives just over there across the river. So basically all the people working in the woods are quite local.
My name's Gord Hale, and I live just out of eye shot from where we're currently working. I have a wife and 4 kids. 2 are moved out, so I got 2 little ones there still. So it's really nice to be around for that, where a lot of my peers and stuff, they're displaced and all over the province and beyond. So working here has been a real treat, so it's really nice that way.
To speak about employment numbers, the kind of forestry that we do does require a fair bit of extra planning work, and logging takes a little longer, and we're not a high production kind of outfit, so the number of jobs per 1,000 cubic meters or per cubic meter is higher in the woods as well as at the mill. It's much higher at the mill, but it's probably twice the provincial average in the woods side as well because of our style of logging. It's not just great big clear cuts, which is more efficient, but from a strict economic production view, but it is not suited to to our management style. It's local jobs, but it's also a higher number of jobs per cubic meter.
Having the number of full-time jobs that are there now and still being able to make all of your payments, I think that is what the aspiration was in the beginning.
The experience of Harrop-Procter Community Forest shows that something lastingly positive can emerge out of controversy. Harrop-Procter shows what a small, isolated rural community is capable of when a critical mass of committed citizens come together. Harrop-Procter Community Forest is a co-op managing 11,300 hectares of Crown land, literally the locals' backyard. They are the only Forest Stewardship Council certified community forest in British Columbia and actively engage in outreach activities with other community groups, forestry and environmental organizations, and researchers. Ramona, Rami, Eric, and their colleagues would be delighted to hear from you. So would we. Visit our website at bcruralcentre.org or drop us an email at info@bcruralcentre.org. Thank you for watching.